crews in similar circumstances would have been killed or seriously injured.
The introduction of body armor reduced injuries in air crews by 60%, a point hammered home to the airmen by their wartime training films.
You'll be going on leave in a couple of days. Aren't you glad you wear your flak suit?
Boy, am I. Just look at it. Look at these plates here. All I've got to show is a little tattoo mark.
Studies conducted during the Korean War found that 92% of the wounds were caused by fragments, primarily from mortars and grenades. The need for body armor was clear. In 1950, lighter, more flexible armored vests of Doron fiberglass and ballistic nylon were introduced for the infantry. The new 8-pound vests were found to reduce casualties by 30%. In 1952, the U.S. Army stepped up its efforts to use advanced technology to improve battle gear. The Natick Research, Development, and Engineering Laboratory was founded near Boston, Massachusetts. Natick's mission is to increase the survivability of the individual soldier in all environments. Much of Natick's breakthrough work resulted in improved battle gear for soldiers in Vietnam. In 1961, a ballistic nylon liner was introduced for the N1 helmet, raising the protective level 15%. This improved design was credited with reducing casualties by 8% in Vietnam. Using new fabrics and materials, Natick developed better flak vests for Vietnam helicopter crews. Based on the success of this design, armored vests soon became standard issue for the infantry as well.
The uniform is a steel pot and a flak jacket, and that's the whole way in the long bend. I don't want anybody with their flak jacket or their steel pot off. Is that understood? Can anybody not hear that?
In Vietnam, flak jackets were extremely widely used. Almost everybody in combat, and even many rear echelon troops, used flak jackets because of the danger of mortar attacks and the like. It was not really effective against rifle ammunition fired from short or medium ranges, but it was effective against grenade and mortar shell shrapnel and pistol ammunition.
Men in mechanized and cavalry units tried to own 2 flak jackets. Riding along in an M113 armored personnel carrier, they wore one jacket and sat on the other to protect every part of their body. The extreme climate of Vietnam created unique challenges for battle gear designers.
It wasn't so much the war that I found hard. I found just everyday living hard. It was hot, it was cold, it rained, and it was just god-awful living out where the mosquitoes come along at night and pick you up and carry you away.
A new uniform was fashioned for the jungle heat. A lightweight load-carrying system was developed. Combat boots were redesigned for the tropical climate. The new boots were lighter, resisted moisture, and had a stainless steel insert in the sole to prevent penetration from punji sticks. Efforts were also made to enhance the senses of the soldiers. Most attacks on Allied positions occurred at night. To defeat the darkness, a family of night vision devices called starlight scopes were developed. These scopes could detect even the faintest light at a range of up to 1,200 meters and amplify it thousands of times. The smallest of these could be mounted on the M16 rifle. Unfortunately, the starlight scope's technology could be defeated by rain, fog, or smoke, all 3 plentiful in Vietnam. The Manpack personnel detector chemical, better known as the people sniffer, was devised to detect the presence of the enemy from the ammonia in his perspiration. Unfortunately, the sniffer proved too sensitive and picked up ammonia from other sources, including animal dung. At the outset of the war, American forces carried the M14 rifle. Introduced in 1957, the weapon was essentially an upgraded M1 Garand.
The M14 used the same round, the same gas-operated recoil mechanism, but they put in a 20-round magazine so that could be changed very quickly. They created some with selective fire, so you go full automatic, changed the stocks from wood to composite so that the humidity and temperature wouldn't affect the accuracy of the weapon in a jungle environment.
Soon the troops received the controversial M16 rifle.
What would happen in this weapon, it has a complicated way to lock it into the firing position. And that area in the chamber could get fouled very easily. So you had to keep it clean. And if you didn't keep this clean, the bolt would come and not seat itself. And you can't clean a weapon during a firefight.
The weapon has gradually been developed. The problems of ammunition have been solved by redesign of internal components. Nothing has been able to equal the lightweight and the firepower that the M16 can generate. And the result is now the rifle has completely left behind all of its problems and is considered a superb weapon.
Battle Gear will continue in a moment here on AMR.
Perhaps the greatest single breakthrough in the protection of the soldier came in 1965 with the discovery of Kevlar. This lightweight material has a tensile strength 5 times higher than the strongest steel wire. In fact, a Kevlar flak vest weighing just 1.5 pounds can stop a .38 caliber bullet at close range. But Kevlar wasn't invented to protect the soldier. It was engineered to reinforce the radial tires on your automobile. This remarkable aramid fiber developed by DuPont has proven invaluable for its protective capabilities in modern battle gear. 7 layers of Kevlar can stop a .45 automatic round, and 28 layers can stop a .44 Magnum round. Kevlar vests and helmets are standard issue for today's forces. Combat vehicle crews also wear Kevlar helmets and Kevlar flak vests. In addition to its amazing ballistic protection, Kevlar is also resistant to flame, cuts, and a broad range of chemicals. The Kevlar helmet, developed by the Natick labs in the late 1970s, weighs just 3 1/4 pounds, but is up to 40% more resistant to fragments than its steel predecessors.
Hey! Move it out! We got third! Third! Follow us in line! Hey, pass it down the line! Let's go! Pass it down! Pass it down! Follow us on line!
The individual soldier who transferred his old steel helmet to the dustbin of history and took on the new Kevlar helmet initially may have been a little bit annoyed at the fit of the helmet and complained that you couldn't wash out of your helmet now because you don't have an insert. What you've got in the Kevlar is all the webbing is put right inside. However, it wasn't until the invasion of Grenada that the true ballistic tests of the Kevlar helmet came out to every soldier to see. We had soldiers that were actually shot in the head by enemy rifles in the helmet and survived in ways the steel helmet would never have been able to protect them. So the Kevlar helmet was battle tested at Grenada. It was approved by the soldier after that operation, and there are very few soldiers on the battlefield today who'd want to give up their Kevlar helmet and go back to an old steel helmet if the artillery started to fly.
New protective materials such as Allied Signal's Spectra Shield are 10 times stronger than steel. These materials are very effective in preventing blunt trauma. The impact of a bullet on a flak vest is similar to the blow of a hammer. This blunt trauma can be as deadly as the bullet itself. Modern body armor dissipates the impact of the bullet over a wide area, greatly increasing the soldier's chance for survival. Throughout the century, we've seen incredible advances in technology, weapons, and battle gear. Today's soldiers march to battle with lightweight, durable combat equipment that would seem inconceivable to their ancestors. The primitive gas masks of World War I have developed into today's advanced chemical suits.
Cut along, cut along, cut along.
Leather flight helmets and jackets have evolved into no-mech suits capable of withstanding temperatures above 700 degrees. Binoculars and searchlights have developed into sophisticated night vision goggles and scopes. With technology moving so rapidly, with experimental systems like sight operation, one has to wonder if man will ever be totally replaced by robots on the battlefield.
War is a human endeavor, and when war becomes merely a battle between machines and man is taken out of the loop, it'll no longer be war. It'll be something else, but it won't be war. The soldier on the battlefield is still the most critical element in conventional war. No matter what the situation, you can bomb the area, you can napalm it, you can turn it into glass, but unless you're willing to put your men in the mud and hold that ground, you don't own it. At some point, warfare will involve the use of robots. It'll be a few years until this becomes common practice in most armies. But whether it will ever replace man on the battlefield, whether a machine will ever be able to outthink, show more initiative, be able to endure, be able to survive, be able to adapt, improvise, and overcome, that's the question that has yet to be answered.
The quest to ensure the survival of the soldier on the battlefield is as ancient as warfare itself. Originally using armor of bronze and steel, today with a remarkable array of high-tech battle gear. Military designers continue to develop better methods of protection, but ultimately, the most valuable weapon soldiers carry to the battlefield are their commitment and their courage.
CIA, espionage, assassinations, coups d'etats. What goes on behind closed doors in Langley, Virginia? Now you can find out. Call 1-800-423-1212, and for only $59.95 plus $5.95 shipping and handling, you can own this special 4-part deluxe boxed video cassette package, CIA, The Secret Files, an inside look at one of the most powerful and mysterious organizations in the world.
So, how'd you like brute force?
I love a man in uniform.
Join us Wednesday for a look at Vietnam's most dangerous flight missions on an all-new air combat.
Hey, Wayne Rogers is hosting improv.
Let's grab some late-night laughs next on A&E.
It's time well spent.
century.
Cheers and songs and flag waving. America goes to war wide-eyed and eager. My message was a message of death for our young men. How strange it seems to applaud that, confides Woodrow Wilson. And he publicly declares, it is not an army we must shape for war, it is a nation. 10 million register for the draft, and the whole country submits to government control and direction on a scale never before imagined. In a few swift months, the United States undergoes its deepest transformation since the Civil War, as the country answers the President's call for force to the utmost, force without stint or limit. Mobilization of the mind, given new scope and intensity by the American genius for advertising. Never before has the art of propaganda been used so widely and successfully as in rallying the nation behind the Great War. Movie favorites like Marie Dressler are a powerful new influence on the national scene, and the whole rising galaxy of Hollywood stars twinkles patriotically to boost the sale of Liberty bonds. America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford, does her bit. I'm in love with you, pretty baby. Charlie Chaplin. Douglas Fairbanks. Broadway, hello France, for more than 2 million young Americans. And with them goes something more powerful than all their weapons and equipment. The words of Woodrow Wilson. We have no selfish ends to serve. We desire no conquest, no dominion. We fight for the ultimate peace of the world and for the liberation of her peoples, the German peoples included. For millions on both sides, the words of Wilson lift the war high above the stalemated slaughter of the battlefields, above the savage strangling on the sea and under it, and give it moral significance. A war to end war. The American Expeditionary Force, the AEF in France. For the war-worn British, it is the last great reserve army of civilization. In its coming, the French see the magical operation of a blood transfusion, the arrival of new life in floods to reanimate the mangled body of France, bled white by the innumerable wounds of war. The Yanks have come. The Yanks are over there.
General John J. Black Jack Pershing, commander of the American troops, applauds the words of his subordinates. Lafayette, nous voici. Lafayette, we are here. Before battle, months of training, reorganization, and deployment. Time to see something of France, which of course means Paris. Back home, they're having wheatless Mondays and meatless Tuesdays and hunting spies and hounding slackers. But behind the lines in France, the most important thing, the most important girl in the world is Mademoiselle from Armentières, who hasn't been kissed in 40 years. Oh, the general got the Croix de Guerre, but the son of a gun was never there. Hinky-dinky parley-woo. The fields of France and Flanders, no man's land. After 3.5 years of futile attack and bloody repulse, victory seems no nearer for either side. 700,000 casualties, French and German, at Verdun, and nothing gained. 60,000 British lost in a single day on the Somme, and nothing changed. And the worst comes at Passchendaele, and nothing changes but the casualty list. Do you remember the stretcher cases lurching back with dying eyes and lolling heads? Those ashen gray masks of the lads who once were keen and kind and gay. But in spite of everything, they sing, what's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. A whole generation, British, French, German, the finest, the best, the bravest on both sides, is fed into the mincing machine. 500 miles of Germans, 500 miles of French and English, Scotch and Irishmen, all fighting for a trench. And when the trench is taken and many thousands slain, the losers, with more slaughter, retake the trench again. As 1917 ends, the trenches run unchanged from Switzerland to the English Channel, and the greatest battle of all is yet to come. Field marshals will decide when, generals will decide where. C'est la guerre. But for the men, I have a rendezvous with death at some disputed barricade when spring comes back with rustling shade and apple blossoms fill the air. And I to my pledged word am true. I shall not fail that rendezvous. The German High Command. With the coming of 1918 comes a momentous decision. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria, Turkey, Bulgaria, have a new Supreme Commander, Field Marshal Hindenburg, hero of the strategic victories which have defeated Imperial Russia and paved the way for the Communist Revolution. But Germany's war at sea has failed, and the Western Front is deadlocked. So Hindenburg and the General Staff decide on what they admit is a gambler's throw in the West, where the war will be won or lost. With Russia eliminated, the High Command moves 1 million battle-hardened troops and 3,000 guns from east to west. The race for France begins. Can Germany apply overpowering pressure against the exhausted British and the depleted French before American military might comes into full play? Says Hindenburg, that and that only is the decisive question. Time will no longer wait for either side. Behind the Kaiser's unbroken military front, unrest is simmering. Great Britain's naval blockade has sapped the German economy. Germany's allies are faltering. American strength is growing. For Hindenburg and his brilliant chief of staff, Ludendorff, there remains only their gambler's throw. Break the enemy line, split the British from the French, and bring the allies to their knees. For the first time since the invasion of Belgium, German numerical superiority in the West. 750,000 men secretly marshaled along a 50-mile front. March the 21st, 1918. The great offensive of the Great War. The French and British lines crack and break. In assault after assault, the Germans close in on Paris and threaten the English Channel. Allied order of the day to all ranks in France and Flanders. Every position must be held to the last man. There must be no retirement. With our backs to the wall and believing in the justice of our cause, each one of us must fight on to the end. The safety of our homes and the freedom of mankind depend upon the conduct of each of us at this critical moment. And the Allied governments inform the United States, there is great danger of the war being lost unless the numerical inferiority of the Allies can be remedied as rapidly as possible by the advent of American troops.
This century will continue on TLC. Home Buddies, weekdays at 4 and 7 on the Learning Channel.
A revolutionary TV offer. Introducing the Universal Remote from TV Guide. It's got a feature no other remote has. It's free. Free with a paid subscription to TV Guide. This 3-in-1 remote's free and gives you the power to control it all. Your TV, cable, and VCR. It's perfect for those who have lost a remote or are tired of fumbling around with many remotes.
I want one.
Beautifully designed by Memorex with big buttons and a sleek comfort grip. It's easy for a child to operate and works with virtually any TV in the house. This all-in-one remote is free only when you subscribe by phone to TV Guide during this special TV offer. With comprehensive listings, you'll see what's best for you and your family. What's hot and what's not. Discover a world of fun and games, soaps, sports, sitcoms, and movies. Call now. Get 68 issues, including TV Guide special issues for 4 easy installments of $14.99 each. Use your credit card today. Get Universal Remote absolutely free. Put the world of TV at your fingertips. Call now.
I took diet pills. I lost 34 pounds.
6 months later, the weight came back.
That's when I decided to get off the diet roller coaster and get on a Nordic Track.
In fact, Nordic Track is so easy to stick with that after 5 years, 7 out of 10 Nordic Track owners still use their Nordic Track skiers an average of 3 times a week.
It's been more than 2 years. The weight's still off, and I'm still on my Nordic Track. You should give Nordic Track a try.
Call now for a free video and brochure. Take weight off and keep it off. Nordic Track introduces the Weight Loss Satisfaction Guarantee. Research shows that Nordic Track's total body workout burns more calories than exercisers that only work your legs. Discover what numerous customers have found. With regular exercise on Nordic Track, you can take weight off and keep it off. And we're so confident you'll lose weight too, we guarantee it. We'll guarantee that you'll lose at least 10 pounds in 60 days or your money back. Call now for a free video and brochure. Ask about our 60-day Weight Loss Satisfaction Guarantee.
TLC now continues with This Century.
A new kind of war with a new dimension. The pain and dying are the same, but man's inventive genius has improved the methods of inflicting pain and death. For the infantry, the new rapid-fire machine gun, the new heavy cannon of Krupp and Skoda, and newest of all, killing by chemistry, liquid fire and poison gas. And from the air, strafing and bombardment. For the new kind of fighter, the pilot, another new kind of death, the dogfight. The big parade. To support the British at Amiens, to hold them on bridges with the French at Château-Thierry. Now there will be new names to rank with Yorktown and Gettysburg and Manila Bay. There will be Belleau Wood and San Miguel and the Second Battle of the Marne, with Paris less than 100 kilometers away. It is 0 hour for the AEF. July 1918. Counterattack. Over the top. For the Yanks, it's heaven, hell, or Hoboken by Christmas. And the Marines yell, "Come on, you! Do you want to live forever?" General Pershing. Due to the magnificent dash and power displayed on the field of Soissons, the tide of war is definitely turned. German resistance, heroic. German losses, disastrous. Their exhausted infantry now must cope with tanks, conceived and perfected by the British, who used them to breach the Hindenburg Line on August the 8th. The Black Day of the German Army.
This century will continue on TLC.
Want to think outside the box? Bingo! Catch James Burke Wednesday nights on the Learning Channel. He's everywhere, drawing you into his reflections, linking this with this, and this with this, making astounding connections. Then see ideas compete, collide, ignite, create the modern world. Get the vision thing with James Burke. Watch The Day the Universe Changed. Great idea. Wednesdays beginning at 9 on the Learning Channel.
What car has a galvanized steel body to keep rust out and is a convertible to let the sun shine in? Audi. We never change the specs. Not when we can change the species.
For 116 years, we've been handling the business part of life so you could enjoy the living part. Household for the business of living. Watch your mail for a special offer.
Data, digital technology, information superhighway. It's not about data, digits, technology. It's not even about highways. It's about you and me and Uncle Jack and everybody.
An injustice shrouded in the past.
No!
A love threatened by a secret.
I never realized how involved she was in all of this, or I would have never given you the assignment in the first place.
I knew your father.
What will happen to you?
Now they must face the truth that divides love and betrayal.
Angel, save me.
Matt Dillon, Joan Chen, and Bruno Kirby. Golden Gate, rated R. Now playing at a theater near you.
What car offers no charge scheduled maintenance? For the first 3 years or 50,000 miles, leave your wallet home. Audi. Evolution's one thing. Revolution is quite another.
TLC now continues with This Century.
There are perhaps 10 million men dead of this war, and perhaps 100 million persons to whom death would be a blessing, writes an American ambassador in Europe. And he adds, the hills about Verdun are not blown to pieces worse than the whole social structure and the intellectual and spiritual life of Europe. I wonder that anybody is sane. I will lead you into glorious times, the Kaiser once said. But now his subjects say, better an end with terror than terror without end. 4 months of shattering defeat at the front, unrest, revolution, mutiny at home, the hope of a just peace and a better, freer world as promised by President Wilson's 14 points. All these have at last destroyed the German army and its allies. Hindenburg admits, the struggle was beyond our strength. November 11th, 1918, 11 a.m. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The Kaiser has fled to Holland. Imperial Germany has ceased to exist. The Great War is over. The Great War is won. But what good came of it at last, quoth little Peterkin. Why, that I cannot tell, said he, but 'twas a famous victory. From the yesterdays of the old world, home to the tomorrows of the new world. Their country has emerged from the Great War as the most powerful nation on earth. An era has ended, another begins. And we won't come back till it's over there. 50,000 Yanks will never come back. But those that do believe that it is over there. That they have made the world safe for democracy, that they have fought the war to end war. And so, Johnny comes marching home.
The Great War changed the course of history as few events before it. Idealism was quickly used up as the Treaty of Versailles imposed harsher terms than Germany expected. The wreckage of war smoldered and began to fuel a new one. A tide of nationalism swept through Germany. An Austrian-born psychopath, Adolf Hitler, challenged a naive world. Barely 20 years after the war to end all wars, Nazi stormtroopers were goose-stepping across the pages of history. I'm Tom Brokaw, and this has been another in the series, America, a look back.
Actors become soldiers as the movies recreate the rigors of combat. See how it's done on Hollywood Effects Masters, next from TLC. After that, dig into the world of tunnels on Beekman's World.
The original was called the greatest science series ever. This time, it's even better.
The steel rector's about to plummet.
Today's office doesn't always come with four walls. So no matter where your employees do business, AT&T has a way to help them and to give you more control. Call for the AT&T corporate calling card.
Hi.
We can customize a plan by letting you choose from more than 70 different features. If you're responsible for controlling expenses, we can customize your bill by location, individual, or account code. If you're concerned about card security, we offer customized fraud protection for your company and employees. We also offer discounts as high as 40%, a variety of competitive savings plans, and easy worldwide access.
We got the job.
Call AT&T now and decide how many or how few features you need. The AT&T corporate calling card.
I don't know, call it a hunch.
Find out how customized a calling card can be.
Yeah, Bob, the Russians look great, but these rewrites are killing us.
This guy can fly. Bang, we got him on the Roz. He's trying to target us. Jam him.
Space technology of the 21st century.
He's pulling a 7G turn out of here.
It's here, now, in the Air Force. Aim high. Air Force.
You've learned why the Roman Empire crumbled and how to restore your antique desk, all on the new Learning Channel. But if you're not getting this, you're not getting the full picture. Introducing the Learning Channel's new magazine, TLC Monthly. Here, finally, is the only comprehensive guide to the programs on the Learning Channel. Programs that are entertaining and provocative. Programs that explore the world of ideas. Call now and receive 12 issues of TLC Monthly. Lushly illustrated, full of articles that complement the programs on the Learning Channel. Articles on the world of science, ancient history and cultures, human behavior, leisure and lifestyles, plus complete hour-by-hour program listings to help you plan your viewing. Call 1-800-634-3700 and order your subscription today. 12 monthly issues for a special charter rate of only $9.97. Order now, because if you're not getting TLC Monthly, you're not getting the full picture.
They traveled light, struck hard. Genghis Khan's Mongols terrorized Buddhists, Muslims, Christians alike. Legend drove them to conquer, enslaving millions all over Asia, crushing Europe's finest armies. Their culture flowered, trade flourished, only to collapse after 3 generations. But their conquest lives on. See how. The Mongol hordes storm from the east, 6 straight hours, Friday beginning at 9 on the Learning Channel.
Up next, enter the world of illusion through Hollywood Effects Masters with host Christopher Reeve. Then at 11:30, it's a trip into Beekman's World, tonight on TLC.
of Daniel Boone's long-barreled flintlock, exploding in the grassy hills near Kentucky.
In such dangerous times, the experienced mountaineer is never without his rifle, even in camp. His rifle is his constant friend and protector. Washington Irving.
No matter what a man called it, meat getter, hair saver, or sure shot, his gun could be trusted to get him out of a tight corner against hostile Indians or a charging animal. Though Daniel Boone would not travel to the far west, the epic journeys of explorers like Lewis and Clark revealed to America a breathtaking expanse of beasts and exotic native peoples. It guaranteed further exploration by the fur traders and mountain men.
The first guns which would have been carried west by the mountain men would have been typical Kentucky, Pennsylvania rifles. They were rather long in barrel, they were smaller in caliber, about 40 to 45.
And these things were accurate up to about 200 yards, relatively light, and often works of art, very, very beautiful. And amongst the most extraordinary of objects of decorative art from the 18th and the 19th century are the so-called Kentucky rifles and the successor guns known generally as plains rifles.
These rifles fit the forest. They could hit small game from a distance and provide self-defense from hostile natives. The spark came from a simple flint, and replacement stones could be found lining the riverbeds.
In the hands of somebody who is thoroughly trained and experienced in loading a muzzle-loading rifle, you could probably get about 4 shots a minute. What you would do is pour a measured charge of powder down the barrel, put a piece of cloth, a patch, over the muzzle, place the round ball on that, and then ram it down until it was seated against the powder charge.
The flintlock is so named because there actually is a piece of stone, piece of flint, held in the jaws of the cock. When you withdraw the hammer or the cock to full, and then squeeze the trigger, the sparks are generated that flash into the pan and ignite the main charge.
The flintlock was as simple and elegant as the land it came from. The tool of travelers, fighters, pioneers, and hunters, its echo would be heard as far west as California.
What they found was that there was bigger game out west, like the grizzly bears and the brown bears and far more buffalo. So the reports came back east to the gun makers, many of whom were in places like Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and they were told that they needed bigger guns, more powerful guns.
Philadelphia gunsmiths like J. Henry and neighbor Edward Tryon began supplying the guns that would tame the perilous land ahead. Another such maker was called Hawken.
Of course, the trapper or the mountain man, the fur trader of the 1820s and 30s, the general weapon of choice was the single-shot, half-stock rifle, the type made in St. Louis by the Hawken firm.
Instinctively does a Rocky Mountain trapper, in moments of peril, grasp his trusty rifle. It is his companion and his best and truest friend. With a Hawken rifle in his possession, he feels confident and self-reliant and does not fear to cope with any odds or encounter any danger. James B. Marsh, 1884.
The Hawken rifle was prized by one Christopher Kit Carson, skilled trapper, pathfinder, renowned Indian fighter, and infantry leader.
There are at least 3 guns associated with Kit Carson that were made by Hawken, and there's the most wonderful story of Carson coming in to see Hawken. Some years before, he had ordered a rifle, and he'd been out on the plains or whatever for many, many years, and he came back into Hawken's shop, and Hawken didn't even recognize him.
Oh, yes, I made several for Kit Carson. One of them he prized very much. Kit gave me an order for a rifle, and I didn't see him again for several years. One day, he walked into the shop. I didn't know him, and he asked if I had any rifles. I told him there was one on hand, and that was made for Kit Carson. "That's my name," he said, and took the rifle for $25. He would have readily paid twice as much, for all my guns were made to kill at 200 yards. Samuel Hawken, 1882.
These rifles were of rugged proportions and substantial firepower. They could take the pounding of the frontier and were accurate.
You would be foolish to venture out beyond the Mississippi River without a firearm. And indeed, even with one, your life was still in great danger.
Well, with the pioneers, the mountain men, whatever, dealing with the Indians, the main disadvantage with the single-fire gun was that the Indians knew that you were shooting a gun like that, so they waited until you shot, and then they would descend on you with very unfortunate effects.
Quite often, the mountain man would carry a sidearm. They were often used, let's say, as a last resort weapon.
You could have a secondary firearm with you, usually a handgun. And they were rare, of course, in the West because of the additional expense and the nuisance of carrying a handgun, since there wasn't a regular holster. You either had to throw it through the sash that held yourself together or wear it on your horse.
Trappers usually traveled in groups, so if attacked by hostile Indians, they would not empty their single-shot rifles all at once. When Jedediah Smith and his men encountered Mojave Indians in 1827, they had only 5 guns among them. Smith ordered,
"Not more than 3 guns should be fired at a time, and those only when the shot would be certain of killing."
Sidearms, however, offered no guarantee of survival. In 1831, Comanches killed Jedediah Smith on the Cimarron River. The elegant dueling pistols he carried spoke of the need for the faster and more deadly weapons that were to come.
The guns that tamed the West will continue in a moment.
The first settlers were drawn west by the prospect of acquiring furs and farmland. But these pioneers were but a handful of those yet to come in search of gold. As the population grew, so did the violence. In a territory where lawmen and judges were hard to find, it's not surprising that names like Colt, Derringer, Smith & Wesson were called on to settle disputes between men in this lawless land. When James Marshall found raw gold 44 miles upstream from Sutter's Fort in 1848, the lure of California's riches would give history the gold rush of 1849. Prospectors, gold seekers, and dreamers migrated westward by Santa Fe and Oregon trails or by fast clipper ship through the Panama Canal to San Francisco.
People came from everywhere. It wasn't just folks from the eastern United States, but people from Australia, people from China, people from Europe, people from other parts of Asia. Everybody rushed in. Everybody wanted a piece of that golden dream.
These hardy souls risked everything on their journey, but on arrival in the gold fields and boom towns, they were still in danger.
During the gold rush era, personal protection became a matter of absolute necessity, particularly in the mining camps where there was no law and order. The miners who went to California, to Montana, to Denver area, all make sure that they carried some sort of handgun.
With all of the gold seekers, the individuals who went out with the idea of starting businesses, there also came thieves, murderers, prostitutes, and it really was a very lawless period out in California. And virtually everybody carried a gun or knife for self-defense.
There were military companies, fire companies, brass bands, banks, hotels, theaters, hurdy-gurdy houses, wide-open gambling palaces, street fights, murders, riots, a whiskey mill every 15 steps, a dozen breweries, and some talk of building a church. Mark Twain.
The desire to be armed was informed by the fact that people expected to be confronted by the notorious in California. Those who didn't find gold honestly might take it dishonestly, that temptations in gambling halls also might take one's riches away from one. And so people believed they needed to be well armed.
Many got peace of mind from a curious predecessor of the 6-shooter revolver, the pepper box.
The pepper box received its name from the fact that its barrels, which are all integral, are drilled out of a common cylinder of metal, and looking at it from the front end, it looked like the front end of a pepper shaker. You could literally shake the pepper out of it, except this would have a lot more spice if it were coming at you.
To aim along the turning barrel and hit the thing aimed at was a feat which was probably never done with a pepper box in the world. It's a cheerful weapon, the pepper box. Sometimes all its 6 barrels would go off at once, and then there was no safe place in all the region about. But behind it, Mark Twain, 1861.
The trade in arms mushroomed out west, and gun shops sprang up to supply firearms and ammunition for a varied clientele of miners, businessmen, and gamblers.
During the gold rush, human greed emerged in the extreme, and it was pretty necessary to have some kind of defense against these predators who were going to try to steal your gold.
Henry Derringer began marketing his pistols about the time of the gold rush, and they were compact. Typically, they were sold in pairs, and they were quite popular. In fact, some duels were even fought with Derringers during the gold rush.
There are instances where somebody would have a pair of pistols, boom, boom, he fires those, he'll drop them, and then he'll pull out, say, his Derringers or whatever else that he might have, and the last resort would be his knife, because that's always loaded.
Back on the Atlantic seaboard, a man whose name was to become emblazoned with the West was engaged in manufacturing a revolutionary weapon.
Sam Colt is really one of the intriguing people in American history. He had an idea as a young man when he went to serve in the Navy in the early 1830s that, of course, ultimately led to that invention of the Colt revolver in the period of about 1834 to 1836.
Do not be afraid of any man, no matter what his size. Just call on me in time of need, and I will equalize.
Equalizer has often been a term used in reference to Colt revolvers of all different models. The old saying was that God created man, Sam Colt made men equal. And I think that equalizer thing suggested that people might gain both courage and advantage if armed with a Colt revolver.
Then the gold rush strike in 1848 was perfect timing for Colt, and his factory, which he set up in Hartford, began to produce firearms by the thousands, tens of thousands, and there was such a ready market in the California gold fields that something that sold in the East for about $25 could sell for $250 to $500.
Colt made a fortune when the gold rush took over in California. He introduced a new revolver in 1848 and another one in 1849. The sales of those revolvers, in conjunction with his military sales, propelled him into the forefront of pistol manufacture in the United States.
My firearms will not endanger your eyesight or brain. They do not stick fast, as do the guns which open like molasses gates or nutcrackers. They leave no burning paper in the barrel after a discharge to blow the next cartridge into your face. They are always worth what they cost. In the far West, much more. Almost a legal tender. Samuel Colt.
California's population swelled during the gold rush from 20,000 to 100,000. And by 1852, a mail route had been established to connect this growing population with its roots and its gunsmiths to the east.
Of course, among those who had a reason to carry a weapon in the West were those who carried the mail and carried valuables and freight and other goods. The Pony Express riders, in that brief 18-month history of the Pony Express, had as their mission to carry mail and to do so quickly, which meant they couldn't carry a lot of weight. Often their armament consisted of a Colt pocket revolver, and that was about all they could afford to carry in order to work efficiently.
Ben Holliday was known as the Stagecoach King and was the founder and the principal owner of the Overland Stage Company. He was somebody who really enjoyed his role and had a special silver-mounted stagecoach built for him, though he suffered the embarrassment himself of being out in the plains, and he was intercepted by highwaymen.
The growing demand for stagecoach travel led to an ever-increasing demand for revolvers like the Smith & Wessons. But there would be more in a stagecoach arsenal.
The preferred self-defense gun for a stagecoach guard would always be a shotgun. It was something that, with a shorter barrel, say 20 inches, was ideal for maneuverability. He didn't want to, after all, accidentally shoot the driver.
There are many examples of guards carrying more than one revolver, shotguns, repeating rifles, weaponry supplied both by the stage companies and freight and express companies, and weaponry that they supplied themselves.
So if it was a bullion shipment or whatever valuable, there would be a man armed with a shotgun, a 12 gauge or 10 gauge, usually with short barrels so that it was very maneuverable. He would likely have one revolver, possibly two. They were not going to just throw their hands up, throw the cash out of the stagecoach and go on. It was their job to fight back. They were not supposed to surrender.
The guns that tamed the West will continue in a moment.
Attracted by rich soils and river valleys, immigrant wagon trains carried pioneers westward in hope of a better life. Their large wheels enabled them to pass through the ruts of mud in the prairie roads. Their firearms increased the chance for survival along the way.
The immigrants who were crossing the plains in the 1840s and 50s, in many cases were family units, so they might take with them in the form of guns anything that they owned prior to leaving the East. Might it be a double-barrel shotgun, it might be a single-shot muzzle-loading rifle. You could probably pick out about a half a dozen that certainly were very significant and played major roles.
The most practical firearms carried by people who were moving west to farm, moving west to establish homesteads, were usually shotguns or hunting rifles, and often as not, those were weapons that they may have used for the same purposes in farms that they had left in Ohio or Kentucky.
It was a mix. There was no set type of gun that everybody had. They just had, and often these were guns that were passed down 2 or 3 generations, rifles or muskets that would have belonged to grandfathers or great-grandfathers.
Very often, immigrants moving west to establish homesteads and to farm were moving west with a fear of Indian attack. Whether that was a real fear or not almost didn't matter. Veterans of the Civil War armed with their muskets, or travelers armed with shotguns or rifles, needed those weapons not only to satisfy some sense of security because of that fear, but to use them for hunting as well.
A herd of antelopes was seen this afternoon at comparatively short distance. One old fellow was grazing apart from the herd when Reel crept up on him from behind a little knoll and fired a load of buckshot. Reel, being an excellent shot and armed with his shotgun, brought down the game. Helen Carpenter, Oregon Trail, 1857.
Of course, as immigrants moved west on the Overland and Oregon trails, following down the Santa Fe Trail, very often they were bringing weapons that were more ideally suited to eastern environments. Weapons made in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Ohio, weapons of a lighter caliber, single-shot rifles, for example, that weren't necessarily suited to hunting buffalo or killing grizzly bears. And quickly, the immigrants were learning, with the advice of scouts and other travelers, that the larger caliber rifles, such as the Hawken rifles made in St. Louis, were more appropriate to the Western needs.
Firearm in the American West was a tool for survival in 2 respects. It prevented you from being injured or killed by those who didn't want you there. And secondly, it allowed you to get game that you normally would not be able to carry with you. Fresh meat. It allowed you to cross the plains.
Many people, in fact, in that overland journey were injured or killed by accidental discharge of firearms, more so than were killed in Indian fights or other encounters.
The people crossing the plains in the 1840s and 50s, although it's perhaps hard to believe, were more at risk from their own traveling companions than they were from the Indians. They started out concerned that perhaps an Indian was lurking over every hill or behind every bush. Therefore, they carried their guns readily at hand. One of the most frequent ways in which somebody actually might even shoot themselves would be if they were pulling a percussion rifle or shotgun from a wagon, from a bush, with the muzzle pointing towards them. And the hammer might snag on something just enough to draw it back. Then when it slipped free, struck the percussion cap and set the gun off.
Indeed, many people were exceedingly well armed, carrying a brace of pistols or revolvers, California Bowie knives and shoulder arms, to the extent that many were needlessly overarmed.
Our men are well armed. William carries a brace of pistols and a Bowie knife. Ain't that blood-curdling? I hope he won't hurt himself. Lucy Cook, Overland Trail, 1852.
Some of the groups were organized quite efficiently as almost in a military style. And these, in some instances, would get together and order, or rather purchase, specific guns.
One of the most well-organized journeys by covered wagon was led to Salt Lake City by Mormon leader Brigham Young.
In the spring of 1847 in Council Bluffs, Iowa, where the Mormons were detained for the winter before their crossing, Brigham Young stated to his people that no man should cross the plains without a firearm.
1 good musket or rifle shall be carried by each male over the age of 12 years. 1 pound of powder, 4 pounds lead. After we start from here, every man must keep his loaded gun in hand or in the wagon, where he can put his hand on it at a moment's warning. Brigham Young, 1847.
Orrin Porter Rockwell, bodyguard to Brigham Young, is said to have killed hundreds with his avenging angel.
This is a Colt model 1862, referred to as an avenging angel. The reason for this is that it's had the barrel cut off. The Mormons, being missionaries and also very persecuted, needed some kind of defense, but they felt very uncomfortable carrying a large gun on their hip and the Bible in the other hand. So they would cut the barrels off and conceal them and have them for the self-defense.
Guns had evolved past the need for flint. Tiny mass-produced percussion caps now exploded the powder and sent the bullet away to its target. The green prairies in the Northwest offered cowmen a chance to work hard for high profits. They were served by the Colts as well as models like the Smith & Wesson and the Remingtons.
We all carried guns. I remember that each of the 6 men had guns almost exactly alike. We all preferred the Colt single-action 6-shooter or the Frontier model. These men carried their guns with 1 empty shell in the cylinder. This was for safety's sake. The gun was always carried with the hammer on the empty shell. Cowboy at the Embar Ranch, Wyoming.
The first cowboys were really inspired by the vaqueros in Texas. And as the cattle business became really big, well, it was important to bring these cattle up from places like Texas to the trail drives that took them to Kansas, the railheads, and get the meat back east. These cowboys were therefore riding through areas that were sometimes infested with Indians. They might have to deal with rattlesnakes. They had problems that required that they have some kind of a sidearm. And always the best handgun would be a Colt, and the best long gun would be a repeater like a Winchester.
Sometimes the expression, the gun that won the West, has been given to the Winchester Model 1873 rifle or carbine, or certainly the lever-action Winchester.
In 1851, Colt introduced a new handgun to the West. The previous models, the pocket models, had been 31 caliber. The new gun was his 36 caliber or Navy caliber revolver. This particular gun was exceedingly popular in the West from 1852 approximately to 1872. It was probably the most widely carried handgun by the cowboy in the West, by the military as well. Hundreds of thousands of these were produced in the period from 1851 to 1872.
The nomenclature cowboy 6-shooter used for this gun is as accurate as any because of their preference. However, it was not a cheap gun. It was something that might cost them the equivalent of about 6 or 7 months of pay, but it was worth it, and there are many, many references in cowboy memoirs about how important the gun was and how they preferred the single-action Army Colt.
Such guns could be carried in holsters on the hip, which often got in the way, however, and could just as easily be carried in a saddlebag or in a pommel holster. They also would have accessibility often to a Winchester rifle, for example, or a shotgun.
One of the main competitors for the Colt during the period 1870 through 1890 was the Smith & Wesson #3 revolver. Its great advantage was the fact that it could eject its cartridges much, much quicker than the Colt. To eject the Smith & Wesson cartridges, you simply broke it open and the cartridges were automatically extracted.
Revolvers were carried by them to put animals out of their misery if they were injured, sometimes just as a symbol of bravado and status.
The guns that tamed the West will continue in a moment.
Firearms had been introduced to the Native American Indians as early as 1750 by European fur traders. But as more and more white settlers made their way into the frontier, the importance of these high-powered curiosities grew among the natives. They would trade their most prized possessions for guns, to be used as hunting tools and for the advantage they provided in tribal wars. Ironically, the guns themselves became the force used to drive the native peoples from their homeland. Against the onslaught of Western expansion, the Indian was doomed. His traditional weapons, the tomahawk and the bow and arrow, were a poor match for his white opponent's rifles and pistols. The Indian, too, desired firearms.
The firearm was the first item of desire when it came to trade. Among the various implements that he traded for, the gun was the #1 thing he wanted. It gave him a very definite advantage in hunting and in warfare with his brother tribes.
When an Indian was looking at a firearm with the possibility of trade or purchase, so many of the Plains Indians especially were a horseback culture. They looked for lightweight firearms. Whenever possible, they looked for a repeating firearm.
Indian guns usually have a quite distinctive character. They did like to decorate them, so you can find several that are with tacks. But one more important features of their firearms is that usually when they got a gun, that's probably going to be the gun that they're going to have for a long, long time.
You'll notice this particular rifle, it is heavily ornated with brass tacks. This would have been put on by the Native American himself. And this person was able to get quite a few brass tacks, as you can see. Both sides are very heavily set with the brass tack design.
The guns used by Indians are decorated and adapted to reflect their owners' diverse traditions and reverence for this powerful artifact of the white man's culture.
Notice the large bow around the trigger guard. This was so that a mittened hand or mittened finger could get in and use it even in the wintertime. Very typical of all the trade muskets is the brass serpentine design between the two screws that hold the lock.
The brass serpentine, for example, which was a sign of quality in the earlier muzzle-loading rifles, sometimes those serpentines were purchased separately and used as decoration.
The Winchester lever action was a favorite rifle to the Indian on the plains. It reloaded quickly and was a rugged companion.
Fine lever-action Winchesters were frequently given sometimes as gifts of state, but as gifts of commerce to Native American leaders.
The Winchester rifle gave the Indians the advantage of rapidly firing as quickly as the action could be brought into play.
Firearms, especially repeating firearms such as the Winchester, were a great boon to use in battle.
There's been a lot of discussion and argument as to just how well the Indians were armed, particularly at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer's defeat. generally it seems that most people believe that the Indians were not particularly well armed. More recent discoveries out at the battlefield have tended to change that a little bit to the point where now we believe that the Indians did have a proportionally greater number of good, effective repeating rifles.
Well, probably nobody was more aware of that than Custer and his men themselves, because they could hear the repeating gunfire. These sounds of the shots of different types of guns are very identifiable, and a lever-action 1866 Winchester was definitely present in numbers at that battle.
The whole valley was filled with smoke, and the bullets flew all around us, making a noise like bees. We could hardly hear anything for the noise of the guns. When the guns were firing, the Sioux and Cheyenne and soldiers, one fought